In this PowerPoint, we will be talking about the Second Industrial Revolution in Great Britain. Some of the topics we'll be discussing is factory life, the ludities, poorhouses, the writings of Charles Dickens, the Chartists, and the new economic policies that evolved from this time. During this time of the 19th century, several issues evolved while all of this was taking place in Great Britain. Different people with different opinions revolted against Great Britain at the time, and others died and were sickened due to unhealthy working conditions. Alright, so factory life was very tedious. There was very crucial hours, about approximately 14 to 16. Unskilled workers were paid $1.25 per day. Skilled workers were paid approximately $3 per day, but women and children were only paid about a third of this. It was extremely unsanitary, therefore several people died or were sickened from these conditions. Several also were paralyzed due to overworking them and standing on their feet all day. Women typically worked with textiles and the raw cotton. Men dealt with more difficult jobs, such as working in the coal mines, and dealt with steel mines and built the railroads. Children were looked upon as easy labor and were taken advantage of due to their size and capabilities as a young child. Several people were against these conditions and protested against Great Britain. Now, the ludities were 19th century artisans that typically worked with textiles. The whole understanding of the ludities were that they protested against the newly developed machinery. They revolted against New Britain because the new machinery basically threatened their jobs because it did their jobs for them. Two of the main machineries that were used in their place were power looms and stocking frames. And as a result of this, they destroyed all the machinery as a revolt against the industrialization in the Revolution. Poorhouses were tax-supported residential institutions. This is a place that you were required to go if you could not support yourself. Most of these institutions were working farms that produced grain, produce, and dealt with livestock. Here, you were expected to work as much as your health would allow you to. They had very strict rules and very limited freedom. Here, at these poorhouses, it was very unsanitary. Several people died here at the poorhouses due to disease. Charles Dickens' writing had a lot to do with this time. He was an extremely influential writer who wrote, he was part of the Industrial Novels Committee that described the overpopulation and the rise of machinery as well as realities of child labor. He was the author of Oliver Twist and Hard Times. He felt that it was his duty as an author to make others realize the brutalities towards labor and destruction of nature, and that this age of advancement caused inhumane mortalities. One thing that really bothered Dickens was the loss of individualism. He felt as if this quote-unquote time of advancement that everybody was so enthused about was creating a destruction of Great Britain. The Chartists were basically the laborers that dealt with all of the harsh conditions in the factory. This was basically a working class movement for political reform. This reform lasted from 1838 to 1858. About 3 petitions with about 1 million signatures were signed, and finally the last petition was presented to the House of Commons, which was then rejected. People outside the movement saw unrest and thought of the French Revolution and the Reign of Terror, because it mirrored what was happening with the Chartists. Officials fired one day and killed 24 people, as well as wounding 40. The Chartist movement was a representation of the protests and revolts against the Industrial Revolution. After several people had protested about the Industrial Revolution and believed that the laborers were treated with inhumane, several policies emerged, such as better treatment of the laborers. Also, mercantilism was used less, and an increase in internal tariffs were used. Once again, there was an improvement in the treatment of the laborers because so many people rebelled. Two major acts that improved Great Britain's Industrial Revolution were the Factory Act of 1823 and the Mines Act of 1824.